you wanted me to consider?
Sorry, thanks, Mac. The question was, what does inclusive community engagement mean to you? When we think about that word inclusive, what does it mean to you?
From like a outside perspective coming in, or even within community?
Within community. So most of the folks in this workshop will be folks from community who are leading planning work for their own nations. And so when we're thinking about weaving inclusivity into the way we plan engagement, what are some of the things we should be thinking about?
Yeah, I think there's been like a lot of binaries that I think communities struggle with because of colonization, like from the two-spirited aspect or side of me. There was a lot of silent acceptance around that, and I think, you know, that what we needed was space to feel comfortable with doing like ceremony and any other types of cultural practices and traditions. And so I really felt disconnected from my community just because I felt there's these binary roles for cultural practices, and I didn't really have space to do that. And so creating space for two-spirited folks is definitely important, especially for like the youth. I mean, now that we have created some space here, there's been a great turnout of youth, like from like the ages of like 8 to like 15, 16, and that was just something that I had missed out on, and now there's a whole bunch of the community that's showing up. They're being visible, they're showing support, and just really encouraging that like we are an accepting community. Yeah, that's my first thought on that anyway.
That's great.
That silent acceptance is no longer enough.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm going to have lots more questions as we go through the panel. Just before we go to Sarah's intro and thoughts on what it means to do inclusive engagement, just a note on binary for folks that aren't familiar with that term. I think a really common binary is like male, female, right? We see this in community a lot. And I had an example in the last couple of years where I was working with a nation on a piece of policy, and they really wanted to push back on the fact that a lot of self-identified men had been in leadership positions for many, many years. And there was a group of self-identified women in the group who wanted to add a piece into policy that said this decision-making group is going to be 50% men and 50% women. And when they do nominations, you have to decide whether you're man or woman, and then, this many seats for that and this many seats for that. But that's a classic example of a binary like Mack is talking about. And so we had a lot of discussions about how there might be folks in the community who don't identify, who aren't men or women, who are two-spirit or otherwise identify elsewhere on the spectrum. And so by labeling the seats men or women, you're forcing people to either choose, which might not feel inclusive, like it respects who they are, or you're keeping them out of the process altogether because they don't see a seat for themselves. But even though we had this conversation in this community, again, the community said, you know what, we don't have any people like that in our community. And so we're gonna move forward with this decision to do half men, half women. And that's a city concern. You city folks are all worked up about these things. And so really highlighted just how dangerous community space can be, especially maybe in rural areas for folks that don't fit into these binaries. So, Sarah, tell us a little bit more about who you are, where you are, anything else about yourself you'd like to share, and then why, what inclusive community engagement means to you. What makes something feel inclusive?
Absolutely. Oh, that means hello in my language, Meskwaki. My name is Sarah Young Bear Brown. And this is how you would sign that in American Sign Language. However, my Meskwaki name is TtikamiGea. And that means woman standing at the edge of the river. I'm from the Flish clan. And I'm a member of the Meskwaki tribe. And the Meskwaki Nation, I'm here in Iowa. And I just wanted to make sure I paid honor to where I am today. I've been deaf since birth, and I use American Sign Language as my primary language. That was my first language. My second language would be written English. And then my third language would be Meskwaki, which I'm still learning. My mom had 2 children. I am a mother of 2 children. I have a boy who's 7 and a daughter who is 5, and she is deaf. And I walk 2 different worlds. One is that of a Meskwaki woman, and the other that of a deaf woman. So I live in both of those worlds. And I've had many, many experiences with barriers on my path so far throughout my life. Countless number of barriers. Right now, I serve as the vice chair for the Native American Caucus for the Iowa Democrats, the Iowa Democratic Party. I've been in that role for about a year now. I am a deaf Indigenous activist. I've been involved in various different rallies, organizations, and movements, in particular water protection, protesting oil pipeline, and multiple other causes that I've been involved with. I have many different roles. I was recently invited to the White House for a roundtable discussion to discuss Native Americans with disabilities. And I've also joined a committee for a disability grassroots organization as well at the White House. So as I said, I do serve multiple roles. When you ask what inclusivity means to me, I would say that when we have groups of people who have various different identities, like I myself have many intersectional identities. I'm deaf, I'm a woman, I'm a Native American, et cetera, all of those different identities reside within me, and we consider the same with other people. In terms of inclusivity and community, I think when we make sure that we establish a safe space for including others, without marginalizing them. For example, welcoming deaf people, that's a great example. If you have an American Sign Language or a sign language interpreter for deaf people, that's great. We also want to make sure that as an LGBTQIA advocate, people who are Two-Spirit or LGBTQIA plus feel welcome. We don't want anyone to feel left out. That's what it means to me. It means everyone is welcome and everyone is engaged. Everyone can share a space. We want to make sure that everyone has access to their language that they use. and that everyone feels a part of the group rather than marginalized from the group. And I have a strong belief that people should work in a united way. We should all be collaborating and working together. One such instance would be with my Meskwaki tribe. There is no, it's very egalitarian. We don't like to have where men are above women, etc. We like to make sure that everyone is equally represented and equally respected. And, we are still fighting sexism within the tribe. I mean, my gosh, even in the year 2021, we are still fighting for that equality. And it's been a long struggle. A lot of people still believe in the old ways, but then there's people who believe the old ways need to change. So those are my thoughts on what inclusivity means to me.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Sarah. Your bio is so impressive. It's just such a gift to have both of you here sharing your time with us to talk about these topics. And this tension between honoring our old ways, our traditions, and sometimes the gender roles or the binaries that are, or the lack of consideration for folks with disabilities that are part of those old ways, and trying to figure out what are the parts that we need to bring forward, and what are the parts that don't need to be brought forward, that are not really central to our practices, and that keep them from being inclusive to the community members. And I mean, there's so many examples of communities where we had incredible practices around two-spirit folks or taking care of each other accessibility that were lost during colonization, that we can bring back those beautiful practices. So in the next sort of 40 minutes, I'm hoping we could maybe start with the basics, like how do we avoid causing harm to people? What are the very basic considerations for people that are planning community engagement to make them inclusive and avoid causing harm to people, and based on your experiences. And if you have some examples of events that were poorly planned, feel free to share those as well. After we talk about this question, I want to ask you some beautiful examples of gatherings or engagement that felt incredibly inclusive, where you felt safe and welcomed, and what made it feel that way, so kind of, again, on the spectrum from like not causing harm to being incredible and joyful and everything in between. And then after that, I'll open the floor for questions from the group. So let's start with question one, either Mack or Sarah, whoever wants to start first. In your opinion, when folks are planning community engagement, planning community meetings, maybe questionnaires, Zoom meetings, in-person meetings, what are the very basic things they should be doing or not doing in order to not cause harm to people with disabilities, different identities, these intersectional identities that Sarah's mentioned? How do we avoid causing harm, or try to? Whoever would like to start. And again, you can just speak from your own experience. So we're not asking for like the textbook, 30-point checklist on how to make safe space for everyone. That's of course out of scope, but just based on your own experience, what are the basic considerations that make you feel safe in a space? And Sarah, I think maybe you were gonna start.
Mm-hmm. Yes, from my personal experience, people tend to ask me to give a presentation or invite me. And typically with an ASL interpreter, they will mispronounce my Native American name, or they will misspell particular terms. That does hurt me the most. So it's important that I speak with interpreters and meet with them ahead of time so that we can gain that common ground, because the pronunciation and making sure that things are pronounced appropriately is very important. And recently I had an experience where I went to Washington, D.C. And this was with regard to the Standing Rock Youth Summit. We all had a march, and we went to DC so that we could stop DAPL, which stands for the Dakota Access Pipeline. So we all went to Washington, DC, and I was so impressed actually, with their Indigenous, the environment that they provided for everyone there in terms of how they had planned for everything. They provided ASL interpreters. Oh, and they actually had invited as well the Army Corps of Engineers. We were able to meet in their building, and they had set up the whole event. We had sign language interpreters, and there was an invited audience there. Presentations were given, and everything ran very smoothly. So I just thought that was amazing. It seemed as though everyone involved was well prepared in terms of making sure everyone had what they needed. And I think preparation is key, and knowing what the person needs, what it is they want. For example, to be a member, to present here at the CCP conference with all of you, I requested that I could meet with my interpreters ahead of time. And that access was granted to me. So we were able to do that before I was joining you on the panel. What's important, I think, is that if a person is requesting something from you, whether that be an accommodation or a particular need, that is honored by the organization.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Yeah, I love that note about preparation. Making sure we don't cause harm at a bare minimum requires more time for preparation to just think through how to make space safe and inclusive. So that, yeah, feels like one thing. And then the other thing you mentioned, just honoring when people ask for things, just honoring that, respecting that. That's how we make them feel included in the space, to give that extra time and figure out how to make people feel welcomed and considered. Mack, in your experience and opinion, what are the basics that people need to consider when planning community engagement to avoid causing harm to folks with multiple intersecting identities?
Yeah, I really resonated also with Sarah's comment on saying preparation is key. Yeah, I think just folks don't often do a lot of research before like considering who they're inviting to a space. Yeah, like whether that's with like two-spirited or indigenous folks, or like living, yeah, just like with a disability, or just even like indigeneity. I think there's like a lot of like pan-indigenous thoughts, or just that people have or think about two-spirited people or me, or yeah, I don't know. Just doing research kind of beforehand of like who you're trying to engage with, because I feel like I kind of get tired of kind of repeating myself, or like kind of being the teacher or in some spaces, because I don't know, I don't feel like a knowledge holder at all. So I don't know, I feel like when I'm kind of like put on the spot, it's just it's something that I don't really like to do.
I hear you there. I teach Indigenous planning at VIU and UBC, and usually, especially at VIU, the class is predominantly non-Indigenous, but there might be one or two Indigenous folks in the class. And this year I made a point of saying at the beginning of the year, I'm not going to go to the Indigenous student to comment on everything about their experiences and knowledge about Indigenous planning, because they probably get that all the time. And just being aware, for many folks here who are Indigenous, you probably had that experience of always being the go-to to talk about what it means to be Indigenous in your experiences. And the same goes for other folks with more marginalized identities, that fatigue that comes from always being the go-to, while also wanting to show up for your community, show up to advocate for yourself and others. which makes me think that part of how we avoid causing harm is just taking care of people, of everyone, of course, but recognizing that folks with more of these intersecting identities need even more like rest and compensation and consideration because of this extra emotional labor, mental labor that you're providing all the time as spokespeople in all these different ways. I want to add a couple of my own thoughts maybe. So again, I'm able-bodied with straight passing privilege, but I've been a facilitator for like over a decade and a teacher for a few years now. And some of the things that have really helped and that have been taught to me about how to make inclusive space. Like I'll really echo the one about preparation, just making sure you give yourself enough time before community engagement to think through, as Mack said, like, who are you inviting? Who are you inviting into the space? And for those of us that work with maybe one community at a time, especially if it's our own community, you really can think through, oh, I know that Elder Marion is going to come with a wheelchair and needs like a big space right near the door to bring her wheelchair in. And I know that Elder Gertie likes to have her daughter there to help translate things or help her because she's a little bit hard of hearing. So we need 2 seats right next to each other, right near the water because she's not super mobile. And I know that so-and-so is going to come with a family of 3 kids. And so we're going to put them over here and make sure they have the right size seating. So just thinking through who's going to be in the room, even to that level of the individuals, if you can. And if you don't know who's going to come to the space, just trying to be prepared to accommodate folks with all of those different abilities, you know, ages, language abilities, disabilities. And so there's a few things I think we can think about the way we send out the invitation to engage. I know in my own community, the average literacy level is probably grade 3 to 6, maybe below. And that's the same across Canada, Indigenous or non-Indigenous. Literacy overall is much lower than folks who've gone through university probably see. So making sure when we invite people, we're not relying on text, although giving enough to be helpful, but using images, having links, having phone numbers, having supports, so that people that can't, that have lower literacy can still get important information and feel included. Letting folks know what the accessibility and inclusivity considerations are in the way you invite them. So if you're going to have interpreters, letting people know ahead of time. If there's childminding, letting people know ahead of time. If there is food that's going to be offered, letting people know ahead of time. All these little things is really helpful. And then we think about the space itself. So I think in so many of our communities, our gathering spaces are not super accessible and also not really comfortable. And I think comfort is part of inclusivity too. Like, does your body feel good in a space if you're asked to sit there and do some work for a few hours? And so a lot of work can be done to make sure we have gathering spaces where folks with disabilities and folks with strollers and walkers and all the rest of it can get into the space easily and navigate the space easily. I know sometimes folks feel like boxed into a corner if they come in with a wheelchair and they're stuck and they can't move easily, making sure washrooms are accessible, all that stuff, making sure you think about allergies and also the diabetics and have different food options that are safe. And I'm so grateful that we have ASL interpretation here. Also been in other communities where they have Dene speakers or French speakers. So thinking about translation, which also requires prep, but also slowing down in the moment, recognizing that it's okay to pause so that an elder can have something repeated back to them. It's okay to pause so that Sarah can speak with ASL and her interpreter Trayman can share back with us what she's saying. It's okay to slow down to make sure all these voices are included. Those are some of my own thoughts. I could share more maybe, but I want to go to the next question for Mack and Sarah. So we've been talking about some of the basics of how to avoid causing harm, just to like get people into the space in a way that feels considered. But I guess going beyond that, I think what we should be aspiring to do is consider inclusivity and the work of making engagement accessible and safe, actually like a beautiful opportunity to bring more joy, more it's like a gift to ourselves and people to consider these things. It's not like extra onerous work that's a bummer, right? And so I wonder if you have ever been to community engagement that just felt amazing, where the inclusivity or accessibility considerations were just like woven into it so seamlessly that it just felt like a space where people could show up with all of their identities and take part in good ways that maybe you don't see very often. Some examples of things at engagement events that you would like to see happening in more and more communities. Do either of you have any examples like that or stories you want to share? Whoever would like to start. Sarah? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sure I can go if that's okay with you, Mack. So something that was really cool, I think it was 2016 that this happened, but I went to Standing Rock. And I'm not sure if you remember, however, we went there, it was kind of an impromptu thing. And we were kind of celebrating Unthanksgiving because we don't celebrate American Thanksgiving. So we were trying to get people together on that weekend. And we were recruiting for volunteer sign language interpreters, because again, this was an impromptu grassroots thing. We didn't have a lot of funds to offer. So we were asking for sign language interpreters to volunteer. And when we got to Standing Rock, this is the sign in American Sign Language for Standing Rock. When we got there to the site, there were 6 volunteer sign language interpreters there. I couldn't believe it. We were so thankful, so grateful and appreciative to them that they would provide language access for us at all of these events. We were able to go to all the different prayer sessions. We were on the front lines of the protest. And there were about a group of 50 deaf people who were in our water protector group that went together. And we were able to go to the different events there on site. We were involved with the cooking and feeding everyone, all because we had language access. And we had those sign language interpreters that were willing to volunteer their time to advocate for us and support the deaf community at Standing Rock so we could protect our water. And I mean, that was such a fantastic weekend. I really appreciate that experience. And again, people were willing to share of themselves and share their time so that we could participate.
I love that example. Thank you so much, Sarah. I think so often when we think about accessibility, we think about, having to be standing in one place and that it's really sort of static without a lot of flexibility because of the prep that's required. But I love that story because it shares that when you have people ready to step up with the skills needed to support others in the space, you can be on the land. You can be defending your land, your waters, and moving through community in a more fluid way. And it just takes more people to step in and support. And I think that's the case in other ways too. When I think about elders being out on the land, it just takes more people there to help them, move through a space with comfort, or pick them up and carry them over the rocky areas. Or when we think about other folks, just that we can play a role by learning how to support others in our community through learning ASL or through other ways to make sure they can be out there in community actively participating, that it doesn't just happen in one-off community engagements. Thank you for that example. I can picture it in my head. It's beautiful. Mack, do you have any examples of times where you felt just so warmly woven into and considered for community engagement in your community or others? Really good examples of inclusive engagement that you'd love to see happening more often.
I can't think of a specific event, but just when not everybody knows from face value that I have a disability that affects my bones, and I'll have good days and bad days, and where just kind of walking a block is really hard for me. And I've just kind of always appreciated folks who who are like trying to like invite me to events that would kind of just like check up on if I need like any sort of like transportation or anything like that, and just kind of like getting to point A to point B, or even just to the event itself, and just like ensuring that I was physically comfortable like in a space, like things that like you were mentioning prior to the question, like, you know, a seat by the door or something, because, you know, like maybe like walking across the room is just, you know, is just too much. And like if you're inviting like me to a space, like I have to consider stairs, and like they're a little bit of a task. So just, yeah, anyway, not a specific moment, but just, yeah, moments where those kind of things are already considered prior, like just, yeah, really stand out to me.
Thank you so much for those, that example, Mac. It's making me think about, well, yeah, this point about how you don't always know when someone in the room has a disability or has something going on that makes it tricky for them to move around a space easily or engage the way that you might have, that other folks might be engaging. And it's making me think about how, you know, so often in our feasts in community, they might say, okay, elders first. But I remember when I was pregnant with my daughter, I got gestational diabetes and I had to eat on a certain schedule. And in some communities, they would say, you know, elders first, or diabetics or folks with small children, or just widen the accommodation so that if you needed to eat right away, you could jump to the front of the line. And I think there are other examples of where, in a more general way, we can make space for people to take care of themselves in ways that we might not be expecting. And so when I'm facilitating, I try and always say, you know, for example, we have the breaks planned, but people can take a break whenever they need to, and they don't need to ask my permission, because you don't know if someone in the room has to go take some medication or suffers with anxiety and needs to leave the room if a topic comes up that's a big trigger for them, or whatever else, right? And so giving space for people to leave the room to take care of themselves, giving space for people to stand up and move or do other like stimming activities if they're neurodivergent or whatever, giving space for people to tend to their little ones or themselves, giving space for people to opt out of activities because maybe they're having a bad day, maybe they physically can't participate in the activity the way you've designed. So yes, and I see your hand, Mack, I'll go to you in a moment, but yes, there's a lot of preparation we can do to try and make inclusive safe space, but also in the moment, recognizing that we might not have thought of everything, and giving people autonomy and supporting them to take care of themselves in spaces that we're facilitating is also a crucial part of inclusivity, and being willing to be corrected if we miss something crucial or misgender someone or otherwise do something like that that causes harm in the moment. So being recognizing that there's a facilitation component to it as well. Matt, go ahead.
You just kind of like trigger the thought of like I think there's this like perception that like mobility issues are often like correlates with like old folks, elders, and so that's kind of something like where I kind of like feel uncomfortable too, like, you know, giving space, like, you know, helping out like elders first, but like I feel like if there's a line for anything, I get really scared, and I like wait until the room clears out or something, because I don't want to be like rushed or just standing for too long, or like so yeah, like I guess I kind of like a space where it's inclusive of people of like with like mobility issues or other disabilities that might need assistance first, that aren't elders, would just be something that I'd like to see.
Yeah, and again, I think the facilitator can support that by just saying, you know, there may be folks in the room who need to eat right away, or with mobility issues that we don't see. So please feel free to ask for support, even if you're not an elder, if you could use some extra support report or something. I think often if you're the person in charge of the space, just verbally acknowledging that there might be people with invisible disabilities or whatever in the room makes space for them then to ask for help without feeling embarrassed about it or worried. I would love to open the floor now to questions from the group. So we've got 20 folks in this breakout group, and I hope you've been enjoying the panel conversation so far with Mack and Sarah and myself and the interpreters, Kathy and Trayman. Would love to hear from you now. So you're welcome to post a question or comment in the Zoom chat for me to read out loud, or raise your hand using the Zoom function if you'd like to just speak your question or comment. If you've got a question for them, that's great, but you're also welcome to share your own stories of inclusive community engagement and examples you've seen of engagement or examples you've experienced. Maybe you have identities you'd like to speak though to, although no pressure. Maybe you have examples you want to share of good inclusive community engagement. So is there anyone in the group that would like to speak on this topic and or ask a question of the panelists? I'm taking a bit of a longer pause just to let people think. Any questions you have about how to convene inclusive engagement or how to avoid causing harm to folks with different intersecting identities? Andrea, in particular, if you are up to it, I know you have a lot of experience in this area, a lot of wisdom to share. We've got a question from Trisha Bowler in Zoom chat. It says, I'm wondering how to engage elders that are computer illiterate during COVID. Oh yeah, this is a great question. How to engage elders that are computer illiterate during COVID. And I guess the subtext there is so much community engagement is happening virtually, such as this workshop. And so for elders or others who aren't able to access Zoom meetings or Facebook live stream or whatever, how can we continue to engage those folks during COVID or times when we can't get together in person? Mack or Sarah, do either of you have some wisdom on this? Yeah, Sarah, go ahead.
So what I've seen often with elders who either don't have access to a computer or, for example, don't have computer skills, a lot of elders can use Facebook, or oftentimes they will use they can access their email, et cetera, things of that nature. A lot of times there'll be a person from the community who could help an elder navigate either using a computer, accessing a program, or accessing email. So sometimes that support is how we can make that happen.
Thank you for that reminder. Yeah, sometimes Zoom doesn't work, but Facebook or email does. I know, and Mack will invite your thoughts on this if you've got some to share. I know in my own community, we're doing a CCP update right now. And so we've had, I think, 6 Zoom meetings, better involvement from off-reserve members than ever before because the meetings are virtual. So it's more inclusive in some ways for those off-reserve members. But at the same time, as Trisha's mentioned, like way fewer elders and folks living in poverty maybe too than we would get if we were doing in-person meetings with meals and childminding. And so what we're planning to do is after we wrap up these Zoom meetings, we're going to COVID safe in-person engagement in community. So we're planning to phone all the elders in the community. There's like 30 or 40, so that's possible. And the elders coordinator has a list. We're planning to phone them all and just ask if they'd like a one-on-one chat, either over the phone or distanced in person at their homes with our planning coordinator, for them to just talk about whatever their vision is for the community, and the coordinator to take notes and weave their comments into the rest of CCP. So we're going to focus on elders, but we're also planning to open that option up for anyone else in our home reserve, Tzokwari, who hasn't been able to take part in the Zoom meeting. So recognizing that it's not just elders who might not have been in the Zoom meetings, that might be others. And if need be, reaching out to specific groups there too, maybe hereditary chiefs or youth or our folks living on the street right now who haven't been involved. So that combo of Zoom and distanced in person and phone calls at the end of the day, like one-on-one phone calls or individualized mail out to people can be a really nice way to let them know you're thinking about them. And maybe one other thing we're planning to do is at Christmas time, we're planning to write a big summary letter of everything we've done this year and include a draft of the plan and then the information for people to get in touch with us and add their comments and send a big mail out package to on and off reserve homes. So that people that don't get the phone call, don't get the email, don't get the Facebook messages, hopefully get something in the mail to go like, oh, planning is happening and I could be involved. I think also like Sarah's comment about having people in the community support elders or support them to get online, budgeting for that can be really helpful. So saying like, let's say an elder has a youth in their family who's in their COVID bubble, who is really tech savvy, saying we'll give the youth honoraria as well as the elder to work together to take part in these community meetings, or having extra prizes for an online questionnaire for youth that help an elder take the online questionnaire, whatever, some other considerations like this. And Trisha's just said in Zoom chat, I like the phone one-on-one calls. That's great. Thank you. I've got a comment or a question from Andrea, but just before I go there, I wonder, Mack, if you have any additional comments to share about how to include folks who are not so, for whom the technology, like the Zoom meetings, are not so accessible. Any other tips for engaging those folks, elders or otherwise?
I think those are all kind of things that I saw work in our community here. Facebook especially, I noticed like, like a lot of the Musqueam community is on Facebook. And so we would often try and live stream. If there's something happening on Zoom, we would try and live stream it, the Zoom session onto Facebook. And it turned out to be a really good turnout doing it that way. The one-on-one phone calls are another thing that I've seen happen a lot. There were a lot of folks that were a little bit stressed about getting their vaccine passport. And so we did engage directly with the elders in the community. But it was also open to the entire community. But like, I know that, yeah, there's one-on-one phone calls to see if they needed assistance in getting it. And then it was also, it was led by our health department. And so they opened it up that anyone that was to the entire community, if they were worried about, if they were unsure how to get a vaccine passport, that they could come to the office, or they could phone in and they could print it out for you and laminate it so you had it on hand. Yeah, those things.
That's super cool. Thank you for sharing that example. There's just a follow-up question from Trisha about live stream on Facebook. So I'll echo that, Mac. I've been doing community meetings for a few different communities, and we tend to get about half of our participants in Zoom, but about half on Facebook. So it's like we double the numbers when we Facebook live stream. And if you're going to do that, I would say you definitely want someone who's just tech hosting and not like, and someone else facilitating, and ideally someone else, a third person, taking notes or minutes from the meeting. And the person who's tech hosting can make sure the live stream works, but then also take comments that are shared in Facebook and bring them into Zoom chat for the facilitator to read out loud and answer. So even the people taking part in Facebook, even though they're not in the Zoom meeting and can't like ask questions like this, their questions can still be considered as part of the overall discussion. So again, going back to like an original point made in this panel, just a little more prep, a little more time, a few more people with special skills to make sure these gatherings are inclusive, whether they're virtual or in person. But at the end of the day, when you get those elder voices or other voices in there, those other words and thoughts in there, it's worth it. It's worth the extra prep. So the next question is from Andrea, and I think this is actually going to take us to the end of our panel. This is a really nice question to close with. Andrea's asked, I would love to know from both Mack and Sarah, to whatever extent they're comfortable sharing, how their disabilities and genders intersect for them. I would love to know what parts of themselves they view to be particularly strong or beautiful, heart emoji. So Mack and Sarah, whoever would like to start Andrew's question, and in particular, what parts of yourselves do you view to be particularly strong or beautiful?
I think I mean, I struggled with both identities for a while, and they're two things that aren't going to change about me, and I still kind of struggle with my physical disability and like identifying that way more than my gender identity. But through my journey and like learning to like love myself and learning to, and when I finally started to realize I was two-spirited, and it just opened up a whole thing. Like I learned to love like my queer identity and just like my spirit and my indigeneity. And I think those kind of all helped me learn to love myself, and that is also my physical self, which is what my disability is. My disability is physical, so I kind of just started to learn to also love my body through like loving my gender identity. And so I'm starting to kind of take pride in that now. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And Sarah, any comments you want to share about an intersection between disabilities and gender? And then what parts of yourself do you consider to be particularly strong or beautiful?
I would say being deaf, for sure. I've been signing since I was a baby, since I was 8 months old. As soon as my family found out that I was deaf, I started learning sign. So with my tiny little hands, I started signing, and I've been doing that ever since. So that's a strong part of my identity. And also my identity as a proud Meskwaki woman. I still follow the Meskwaki ways. I still follow their traditions. I use the Meskwaki language. Oh, gosh, there's so many, so many of my identities. Being deaf, being Meskwaki, being a woman. Absolutely, I am a proud woman. And I really do believe that men and women are equal. There should be gender equality. And, oftentimes in my tribe, the belief is that men are first. I think that sometimes women should also be first. Why can't we be equal in that way? So I am very proud of my womanhood. I'm proud of the fact that I was able to bear children. I was able to bring life to earth. I have 2 beautiful babies. So, my grandmother raised me and taught me how to be a Meskwaki woman. For instance, the Meskwaki ways of cooking, different traditions, going to different feasts, celebrations. My family, they were all willing to learn American Sign Language in order to communicate with me. I'm so grateful for that. And that is where I feel the most pride, the most strong and beautiful in those identities, because they all make me who I am.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sarah. Your comments make me think about, I think really often there's this balance again between making sure that two-spirit folks or folks that don't identify with a gender binary feel included, but also recognizing that there are some gendered elements of culture or like elements of culture that have been historically gendered that we can feel really proud of and really good about while trying not to enforce that gendering on others, and recognize that people might choose to take part in those things with different gender identities. And it's also, both of your comments are making me think about, you know, with CCP, we talk so often about the one of the beautiful things about comprehensive community planning is that it's holistic. We recognize that the community is complex, and culture and health and education and wellness, like, all overlap each other. They're not silos, right? You can't pull them apart. And I think it's the same with identity. You know, you talked about intersectionality. We can reference the good work of Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw and the term intersectionality, and that although it can be helpful to look at these identities kind of separately, at the end of the day, we're whole human beings with all the different identities coming together into a unique, like, holistic whole. And you know, coming to appreciate the parts of ourselves, even the parts that don't always get as much space or kindness or consideration from others, recognizing those parts are strong and beautiful too, because they make us who we are. And recognizing that for all the people around us, every part of them makes them whole and beautiful and worthy of respect and consideration. There aren't parts we can throw away and parts that we can weave in. Everyone is a whole human being. And I'm thinking about Dr. Chief Bobby Joe from Reconciliation Canada, who talks about how reconciliation starts as individuals, bringing all the parts of ourselves together and healing, doing that individual healing work to love ourselves and who we are before we can reach out to others and do the same. So it's making me think that one takeaway from this panel too can be that maybe a lot of the work for inclusivity is recognizing these parts of ourselves as beautiful, no matter what they are. And trying to learn to love ourselves and show up in space, like, proud, as you both have done today, and sharing your voices and your wisdom and your thoughts with us. So we're looking at 10:31 now. So this is the end of our panel. Mack and Sarah and interpreters Kathy and Trayman, just want to say thank you so much for sharing this time with us. Again, it can be so much extra labor to be asked to show up all the time for these, to advocate for these different communities. So just want to acknowledge that, and also say I'm really appreciative for your participation today. Nice to get to know all four of you a little bit better, and hope you feel well taken care of wherever you're off to next. So folks, we have a 15-minute break now.
Thank you so much, Jessie. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. Are there any other closing words from Mack, Sarah, or Kathy before I do a little bit of housekeeping? Okay.
Well, for anyone who has a disability, a two-spirit, or regardless of your identity, I don't want you to feel that you have to just stay where you're at. I want you to follow your dreams. Don't let anything stop you or get in your way. You should keep going. All right? You can do it.
Love it. Thank you so much, Sarah and Trayman. Great. So we have a break now. You can see the breakout rooms are going to close momentarily. And then at 11 or 10:45, you'll have the option to move into the next breakout. So again, we have a bunch of hour-long sessions or a few shorter sessions with support organizations. So I hope wherever you end up next, you feel well included and get a lot of helpful information. And then we'll see you back in plenary after these breakouts. So have a nice break, everyone. Move your bodies if you can, or find some comfort, rest your mind, and we'll see you shortly.